Now, when we are talking about the second chapter of James, we're not going to talk about the whole chapter. We're going to discuss the idea that James 2, from the verse 1 to 13, is not a lesson about being nice to poor people, unlike what most people think, but rather it is an argument that a man, judged by his signs, is not a person at all, and that the law is one thing rather than a list, because the neighbor, too, is not a thing but rather a person. He's not a list. And we will discuss exactly this whole thesis because everyone argues that the second part in relationship to James chapter 2 is abstract as a systematic theology cage match between faith and work, Trent and Wittenberg, but nobody reads it as one structure of a chapter because if a poor man comes into the assembly in shabby clothes and is told to sit on the floor, and then on the other hand, in the same chapter, you say that, or James says, suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but there's nothing about their physical need, what good is it? It's the same man, it's the same clothes. The works that is being talked about in the work and faith argument are not abstract works. They are the works of mercy toward the poor. From verse 2, James never changed the subject at all, unlike what most people think. The chapter is one continuous argument, and the deeds in dispute are defined ostensibly by pointing at the guy from the top of the chapter. And our whole argument here is to show that the deeds are mercy, or rather, if the works James demands are works of mercy toward a specific poor man in a specific room, then James' works and Paul's work of the law are not the same subject, and you can show that from even the context alone. When you look at Galatians and Romans, you would see that they are fighting a different battle and they are not being opposites at all. That is the whole thesis of the whole, or rather half the second, and we have to find a couple of beats that we will talk about. And I have analyzed half of the chapter in order to find something interesting. As you can see, I have gotten the Greek, I have gotten the references from the four Gospels, I have gotten a couple more analyses from Saint Augustine or the philosophers. We too have this fact that he doesn't talk abstractly, but he too tries to quote scripture. That are here would think that there is a contradiction in place. It's Lord with partiality, for if a man with a gold rings and so on and so forth. But then, 4 verses later, he says that God chose the poor, which is, in a way or another, favoritism, as you can see here in the fifth Christian faith, and heirs of the kingdom which he promised to those who love him. And when you look at the word chose, it's the Greek word for elected, exelexato, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And you would see that the whole theme of these few verses is related to the words of Matthew and some of the words of Luke. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy, which is technically James 2:13. If we look here, for judgment is without mercy to him who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment. So, reading these chapters, you would see that James is quoting Leviticus 19. Leviticus 19:15 says, "Do your neighbor fairly. Do not favor the great, do not favor the poor either." Perfectly balanced and perfectly reasonable. And then James in the fifth one, or the fifth verse, he says, God chose the poor. Either James is careless, or one word there is not being read correctly, which is the word favorism, obviously. It is not read correctly. Our modern view on favoritism is being mirrored exactly on this verse, and we will talk about it. But when you look at Leviticus 19, you would see that James is not free associating about rich people. He is reading one chapter of Leviticus and expecting the reader to know it. Obviously, most of the people when they are writing in that period of time expect the readers to know a lot of ideas. For James quotes, love your neighbor as yourself, calls it royal law. He expects you to know that it is. Leviticus 19:18. Obviously, he wouldn't expect you to know this number, but rather to know your Old Testament. And one verse later, he condemns favoritism as law breaking. The law being broken is 19:15. Those two verses are 3 lines apart in the same chapter. So James is not one nice commandment as you would think, followed by a separate rule about seating. It is a single reading about Leviticus 19 because the whole part that we are dealing with is Leviticus 19, and we don't know about this because we don't read the Old Testament as we should. And you would see too that if you read Romans 13, 8 to 10, after you read James 2 to 18, you will do a double take. For Paul says, love your neighbor as yourself. It sums up all the law. Then he lists, do not commit adultery, do not murder. Then love is the fulfillment of all the law. While James says a royal love is love your neighbor. Then he talks again about adultery, murder. Then he calls someone who doesn't fulfill that royal law guilty of all sins. They are running the same argument, and we would be foolish to think that there is nothing that is specific about the choices of the examples. The two men supposedly at war over law and love are, in these 2 paragraphs, indistinguishable in their understanding about the law.